Last year's top 5 quarterbacks in fantasy were, in order, Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott, Jameis Winston, Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson. Josh Allen was at 6. And I mentioned Josh Allen because my question is, which one of those top 5 guys, and I guess you exclude Jameis, right? Because it's sort of not fair. Which one of those 5 guys is likely to fall out of the top 5 this year? We know Jameis is a backup, so the chances of him, if he's in the top 5 this year, something went really wrong with Drew Brees.
That would not be good. So I would say Russell and Watson would probably be the 2 guys. If any of them were going to fall out of the top 5, those would be the 2 for me. Mm-hmm. Dak is going to be in the top 5, especially with the addition of CD. Kyler will move up into the top 5, in my opinion. And like Russell, like last season in the second half, he was not all that reliable from a fantasy perspective.
Right.
And so I could see him maybe dropping down a few spots, but inevitably he'll be a top 8 fantasy quarterback. Josh Allen will inevitably be a top 8 fantasy quarterback. Although Allen's schedule, especially in the second half of the season, is not kind. So thank goodness he has those skills as a runner to sort of overcome that kind of thing. But those would be the quarterbacks that I would feel like, Watson too, with no Nuke. And they brought in Brandon Cooks, but I mean, you can't replace Nuke Hopkins. So that could mean a little bit of a decline from Deshaun Watson as well. But again, still, a top 8 quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we failed to mention Patrick Mahomes, who slides probably back into the top 5. Remember,
no doubt about that.
He was out of the top 5 mostly because he missed a couple of games with injury. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure he's a top 5 guy. Exactly. So he's probably back in there as well. Yeah, it's interesting. Here's a dark horse for me for the top 5. And this is one where everything has to sort of go right. Mm-hmm. But if it does, could Carson Wentz maybe slide into the top 5? Ooh. If his wide receivers stay healthy, if he stays healthy, if everything sort of works and clicks together in Philadelphia for, say 14, 15 games, could we see Carson Wentz maybe slide into that?
Hey, man, anything's possible. He averaged right around 17 points per game last season. So he'd obviously have to see an uptick in that. If you're looking at a points per game basis, it's Jackson, Deshaun, Dak, Matthew Stafford at 4. Russell Mahomes was over 20 and Breeze was over 20 and Jameis was just under 20 points at 19.1. So listen, man, anything's possible. If I had to guess on who was going to get into that top 5, again, for me, it would be Kyler. It would be Mahomes, which is a no-brainer because, he missed time last time due to injuries. But I mean, Wentz is a good dark horse. I don't know that Matt Ryan is the dark horse, but I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up back in the top 5 throwing the football, especially if the Todd Gurley experiment doesn't go in the manner that the Atlanta Falcons are hoping it goes. So there's another one. But how about Daniel Jones? Let's get Eddie excited. Maybe not top 5. Maybe not top 5, but top 10. Maybe it could happen.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny because I did a dynasty startup draft not that long ago, and I actually, after the draft was over, I ended up swinging a trade to get Daniel Jones. It's a Superflex league, so I have Russell Wilson at 1 quarterback spot. I wanted to get somebody is sort of on the rise, that's a little bit younger, so I made a deal for Daniel Jones, which I'm really excited about. So I'm hoping this works out because I do think there's a lot of potential there. I mean, the one thing that we all know he has to do is sort of curb the turnovers a little bit. The fumbling problem was a big deal last year. So if he can sort of cut back on that, then I think there's a lot to be excited about there, especially, again, look, if the receivers stay healthy, if Evan Ingram stays healthy, we know what Saquon can do. There's a lot to be excited about with Daniel Jones.
I mean, Daniel Jones averaged 16.5 fantasy points per game as a rookie, which tied Tom Brady. It was better than Kirk Cousins. It was better than Andy Dalton. It was better than Jared Goff. It was better than Jimmy Garoppolo. It was better than Phillip Rivers. It was better than Baker Mayfield. So, everything is lined up. They did very well to improve the offensive line. Everything's lined up for this guy to potentially push an 18 to 19 point per game average.
So obviously there's a lot of hype around Daniel Jones. Are there guys that you feel like we are overhyping, guys that are getting maybe too much pub? I mean, immediately Kyler Murray sort of comes to mind, not because I don't think he's going to be good, but because I think his draft value just went so out of whack so quickly, especially after
Sure.
Nuke Hopkins got there.
Mhm.
I mean, but are there guys out there that you feel like are getting maybe too much attention or maybe being overdrafted?
So as much as I loved Ryan Tannehill last season, like the second
Mhm.
half of that season is not something he can duplicate from an efficiency standpoint. So,
Right.
but he's getting drafted as like a high QB2. And then there's just guys, Marcus, that like have had everything go right for them in the offseason, but we're still not sure. We're still not sure if Baker Mayfield is the guy from his rookie year or from his sophomore campaign. We're not really sure if Drew Lock is going to be able to take advantage of all the weapons that the Broncos allotted him in the draft. We don't know about that. So there are some players out there, and I still see Jared Goff ranked as a mid-tier QB2. I'm off the Goff bandwagon. I want nothing to do with him. I feel like unless he is putting up a lot of garbage time points, I just have some fear with Goff. I'm trying to avoid him if I can at all costs. And so those are some of the guys that they still have some stuff. Even Gardner Minshew, although I don't feel like people are hyping him, he's getting a little bit of attention because it looks like he's the number one quarterback there in Jacksonville without much competition, unless you're talking about Mike Glennon, but I don't know that that's going to happen. So I feel like Baker and Drew Lock certainly have something to prove.
Yeah, it's funny because I was my next train of thought was who are the guys that are going to be really hard to project, and I think you named a couple of them there. I mean, you talk about Drew Lock, you talk about some of these. Like I look at like a guy like Sam Darnold, and this isn't just because I'm a homer, but maybe a little bit because I'm a homer. But we're still sort of waiting to see who Sam Darnold is and what he can be. And I know that there are people in New York, Manish Mehta, who is a beat writer there and who's a friend of the program. Like I know that he is big on Darnold's potential and what he can do. And I know a lot of people around the Jets are excited about his potential, but here we are a couple years in and we're still not sure who he is. I think he's one of those guys who is sort of hard to project. I think Tyrod Taylor is hard to project in the sense that we don't know if or how long he's going to be the starter there. Mm-hmm. I think, I would throw Jarrett Stidham into that mix as well too, right? Because it looks like he's going to be the starter there in New England, but fans, we don't know anything about Jarrett Stidham. And I feel like there's a whole mix of guys who probably end up going undrafted. But, I feel like at least one of these guys is potentially going to break out and do something this year. And, we're all going to, whoever is the one who hits on that, whoever the person is who hits on that is going to end up looking like a genius if one of these guys finally comes through this year.
Yeah. Going back, there's the Darnold situation. His number one wide receiver is a slot guy, and Rashad Perriman
and a journeyman speedster.
Has had one good half of a season in his whole career, and he was a first rounder. So I don't know. Like, what did the Jets really do in the offseason for Darnold to help him sort of develop in terms of the weapons that they have? I mean, you could make an argument that they're worse off because they lost Robbie Anderson, although Robbie Anderson is someone who just drove fantasy owners nuts. But what did they do for Darnold? Like, honestly, I mean, Perriman, okay, thanks. So you're right, though. And there's some other guys, too. Like, what's the Raiders offense going to look like with Derek Carr? Based on what they did in the offseason, they want to go into more potentially of a vertical attack. But Derek Carr is not great in terms of vertical attack. He's been a guy whose tight ends have succeeded more in the last couple of seasons. What does Teddy Bridgewater look in Carolina? When he played last season as a starter in New Orleans, his fantasy numbers weren't all that great. So how does he make an impact? So there are a lot of quarterbacks out there that we have certainly a lot of questions about. Kirk Cousins. Yeah. That offense looks like it's going to run the ball a ton.
A lot. Yep.
A ton. But they do have Adam Thielen. And so it's one of those things where this is the reason why a lot of leagues are going to see teams draft just one quarterback. Because why? Like, if I get Lamar, if I get Mahomes, if I get Dak, if I get Kyler, if I get Deshaun, if I get Russell, even if I get Allen, why do I even need to draft another quarterback? I can fill out other positions, and then there's going to be guys on the waiver wire that I can pick through where needed during the course of the regular season.
Here, it's kind of a philosophical question for you. If you're in a Superflex league where obviously you have the option to start another quarterback if you want.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
If you end up say like you wait in the draft, you get one really good quarterback, and then you wait, and you end up draft. Maybe your second quarterback is somebody who's I don't know. Let's just for sake of argument say like Mitch Trubisky or whatever that you drafted.
Oh,
Would you be more inclined to maybe just start another wide receiver or running back in that spot versus starting a quarterback that you just don't feel great about on a weekly basis?
it's always better to start at quarterback at that super flex position. That's why I wouldn't put myself in that situation. So like
right.
if I'm in a super flex league, I'm going to damn be sure that I try and get two guys who I have ranked within my top 24 for at least. So, and again, you follow the flow of the draft. I have a couple of super flex leagues that I run. And I mean, last season, my quarterbacks in one of the leagues was Dak and Jameis. And I did not take them out of the lineups outside of bye weeks.
You're great, right?
Until week 16 when they both tanked and I got beat because neither one of them was any good. But yeah, unless a running back or a wide receiver who's pretty valuable falls because others are going with a more quarterback heavy strategy, then in that case, I could see starting a running back or a wide receiver in that flex. But for the most part, you want to go with a QB there.
Yeah. I know that, at this point in the history of fantasy football analysis, it's hard to identify true sleepers because, by the time we get to like July or August, I feel like every player in the league has been written or talked about on some, fantasy platform. But that being said, is there a quarterback or quarterbacks that we just are overlooking right now? I feel like we've done a pretty good job evaluating quarterbacks, but maybe there's a guy that we're somehow not giving enough attention to.
See, I'm all in on Danny Dimes. And all you need to know is that I'm a Cowboys fan from the Northeast and I hate the Giants. I am all in on Danny Dimes. I love you, Eddie. But so, yeah, you're right. And I see a lot of publications out there that will say, Ben Roethlisberger's a sleeper. No, he's not. Ben freaking Roethlisberger is not a freaking sleeper. I'm sorry, okay?
Right.
Like last year, Lamar Jackson wasn't really a sleeper. He was a breakout candidate. And I get we get into like the freaking intricacies of the English language or whatever. But like Danny Dimes is a sleeper this season. If you want to call Drew Lock a sleeper, fine. If you want to call even Gardner Minshew kind of a sleeper, okay. I know, right? Right. Joe Burrow a sleeper. He was the number 1 overall pick, but he ain't done anything in the NFL at this point. Is he a sleeper? Like Jared Stidham, if you think he can end up doing something, like that's a sleeper.
Right.
So it all depends on your sort of definition of it. Like for me, I mean, I can even put Daniel Jones in a breakout category because he averaged 16.5 points per game last season. So I could put him in the breakout category. And if you want to go deep, like Drew Lock is probably, the poster boy for sleeper quarterbacks for 2020 if Daniel Jones is more of a breakout candidate.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think, I do feel like we've talked so much about some of these guys. I mean, I would say that we're not talking about Dwayne Haskins, but I feel like there's a reason for that. Like you look at the rest of that Washington offense, and it's there's Terry McLaurin, and like really, who else is he throwing the football to?
But if you're inclined to believe that he's going to have a good season, then he certainly falls into the sleeper category.
Right. Yeah. Right. How do you feel about Teddy Bridgewater this year?
I feel like Teddy Bridgewater is going to end up being a matchup-based starter at best. Potentially a guy that you're going to be able to use in DFS because the cost is going to be attractive. But, Teddy was the starter for 5 or 6 games last year in a bananas talented offense.
Right.
You've got Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara and Jared. Like they have talent. And he was not that great from a fantasy perspective at all. I think he averaged around 15 points per game. That's not good. So now you put him in Carolina. I mean, the weapons are clearly not as explosive. I mean, I like DJ Moore. Curtis Samuel kind of took a step back. You got Christian McCaffrey. Bridgewater's not getting drafted in a lot of the leagues that I've been mocked in so far in the offseason.
No, I can't imagine that he will be. I was just sort of curious because I feel like, he's a guy that, look, you look at what he did for the Saints last year. You talked about it. Like he was fine from a football perspective, right? He kept them afloat. He didn't kill the offense. But I can't see a whole lot of fantasy folks going out and going and picking him up this year. By the way, just a quick heads up, guys. Don't have the exact date, but I do know that mock drafts on NFL.com will be open very soon. So keep checking back. I think within the week, we may have mock drafts open. So that's just a thing for, so you guys can keep busy during these unprecedented times, as they say on every single commercial you watch. I was going to ask you your most targeted quarterback in 2020, but I feel like you've already kind of hinted that it's going to be Daniel Jones this year.
Late, yeah. But my strategy. I will wait on quarterbacks, but I will not draft Daniel Jones to be my number one.
Okay.
Because it's at that point I'll have already gotten a quarterback. So obviously I'm going to target Dak because I'm a homer, but only if Dak's price is falling in line with where I typically will go with a quarterback. Kyler, I would love to have. Watson, depending on where he falls. I've been getting a lot of Russell Wilson. Like Russell Wilson ends up being the quarterback where when I'm ready to draft that position, which is probably in the 8th round, maybe starting in the 8th round, unless, a Dak is there in the 7th or a Kyler is there in the 7th and maybe an audible there. Russell, Josh Allen, and Drew Brees have been the 3 guys I've been getting the most in mock drafts and in I just did a best ball. So those are the guys that I've been getting. They fall in line, even like a Tom Brady will be there, Matt Ryan. Those are probably the quarterbacks that I'm going to get. So those guys are from like my rankings. They're like from 6 to 10. And I was in a best ball draft, Marcus, last week. Aaron Rodgers didn't go until like the 13th round.
Wow.
And Kirk Cousins went ahead of him and Daniel Jones went ahead of him and Stafford went ahead of him. And I'm like, I mean, I get it, but it's still Aaron Rodgers. Like he's still one of the top, he's at least a top 12 quarterback for crying out loud. So I don't know. And that was bananas to me. I was hoping to get him as my QB2. Somebody ended up getting him in that round. But I ended up with Russell Wilson. But I was like, holy cow. Like, is it really that big of a fall for Aaron Rodgers? Like, I'd take him as a QB2 all day long to fall that far. Woo.
Yeah. It's funny. I will say that with Rodgers, so I feel like this happens, right? Because at this time of year, the people who are generally doing mock drafts are folks like us, right? They're people in the industry. They're people who are just way into fantasy football, right? And so I know that sometimes a lot of us sort of fall into the trap of groupthink. And so, as we see the Packers not draft a wide receiver, everybody's down on Aaron Rodgers. We see what happened last year. And so I think what happens is everybody just gets off the bandwagon. And then what will happen, I think, was we get into July, we get into August, and you have, more of the casual players that are coming in and mock drafting who are still looking at Aaron Rodgers sort of as the Aaron Rodgers of old and maybe are overdrafting. And I think that's sort of where the evening out process comes in. Like, I do think by the time we get to mid-August, the draft price on Aaron Rodgers might be about right. But I always feel like it goes the other way too, right? Where we get some young guy that maybe not a lot of folks know about, and he gets overdrafted early, and then the casual players come in. They're not familiar with this name. He goes a little bit later, and it sort of evens out. So I think that's sort of where Rodgers is right now. I will say that for guys that I'm looking at, you mentioned Josh Allen. I feel like Allen's going to be there, and he's going to be a popular pick for me, sort of in the middle to late rounds. Russell Wilson's that guy that I feel like he's sort of occupying that Tom Brady space from a few years ago, in the sense that people keep waiting for the fall, right? People keep waiting for that year that Russell Wilson doesn't get it done. And I know last year he was not great in the back half of the season, but you look at his numbers in aggregate, and again, he still hangs around in that top 5. And I feel like we're all sort of fading Russell Wilson, waiting for him to just fall off that cliff. And I think we're going to look up at the end of the year and he's going to be hanging around in the top 8 once again, just because it just seems to be what Russell Wilson does. So if he falls and I'm able to grab him somewhere in the middle rounds, like, I'm okay with that. Like,
who that guy is, and it's not like he is not like a name because he is. Jonathan Taylor's getting overdrafted like crazy.
Yeah.
This guy's going off the board in the 2nd round, and all you're hearing from Frank Reich is how much he wants to get Naheem Hines involved in the passing game. And oh, by the way, Marlon Mack's there too.
Right.
So yeah, it's that for me is like,
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that quote from Frank Reich floating around yesterday, where he was saying, there could be a game where Nyheim Hines catches 10 passes, and all I thought was all of the people who have been on the Jonathan Taylor bandwagon had to just spit out their coffee when they saw that.
Yes, but I have seen like initially when the Colts drafted him, and I did some mocks, like he was going second round, and people were all excited about it, and now like you got to kind of tap the brakes. I even think like with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Like when he initially got drafted, everyone was like, "Oh, great fit," and he is. And I feel like he's going to be the best rookie, and especially at the running back position. But I mean, I've also seen him start to drop a little bit, where people were going with him in the second round, and now he's kind of fallen to the third and the fourth.
Well, yeah, because I think the longer we've gone on with this, the more you've seen quotes out of Kansas City that Damian Williams is still going to be heavily involved. That Damian Williams might be the starter when the season opens, and Edwards-Helaire might have to work to get that starting job. So I think as we've heard more of that, then I think people have sort of cooled on him a little bit. As we wrap up this conversation, do you have a quarterback hot take for 2020?
A quarterback hot take?
Yeah.
Oh man. I don't even know if this is a hot take for quarterbacks, but just in terms of fantasy football overall, I think we're going to have a very slow start to this season.
Yeah.
I don't know if the season's going to end up being kicked off right now in September, or if they're going to have to delay it depending on what happens with the coronavirus situation. But like Tom Brady, and again, we talked about it today, he's getting in some work with his teammates. If there is any sort of issues with, teams being able to get together, especially quarterbacks on new teams, Joe Burrow, Phillip Rivers, you're gonna potentially have a little bit of a slow to gain that rapport. Drew Lock has got a few more weapons in the passing game that he's going to have to gain a rapport with. You might see some quarterbacks, and again, the positions overall, a very slow start to this season. And I had Austin Eckler on my Sirius XM show last week, and he kind of said the same thing, is that if we have delays in terms of what we could do, we already had delays, but if we have continued delays with, OTAs and being able to get guys together who have never played on a gridiron before, that's going to mean that this season potentially could start off very, very slowly from a statistical perspective.
Yeah, I do think that that's a strong possibility. I mean, just, look, we always sort of complain about the fact that, the starters don't play a lot in the preseason. And so the first couple of weeks of the regular season end up looking like preseason games. They look kind of sloppy. So now if no one has a preseason or they have a shortened preseason, then I think it's going to be really, really rough for the first few weeks of the year. I will say that. Here's my quarterback hot take, and if this hits, then I'm gonna, I'm never gonna let you guys forget it. But if it doesn't, I'm just gonna say it's a hot take, and we'll just, bury it in the dustbin.
Top 10 quarterback. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna go Baker Mayfield top 3.
What?
It's a hot take, right? But here's the thing. I mean, like, this was last year. We were thinking, hey, man, like outer reaches, Baker Mayfield could be a top 3 quarterback. Like that was our hope last year. Obviously, it didn't happen this year. They still have the same skill position guys. They went out, they've added offensive line help. They have a new head coach and offensive coordinator in Kevin Stefanski. They have sort of turned to the page. And I know that turning the page is a thing they do frequently there in Cleveland. They've been doing it for the last couple of decades. But maybe this page turning works. That maybe we're sort of, I know that everybody got burned by Baker Mayfield. And so because of that, a lot of people are off the bandwagon for him. I mean, I'm seeing him right now on Fantasy Football Calculator. The ADP is a 10th round ADP, which sort of surprising. That seems even high for me, but I'm going to say that this is the year. We were a year too early on Baker Mayfield, and this is the year. So my hot take is that he ends up as a top 3 quarterback.
All right, my hot take is that Case Keenum will be the starter by week 5.
Yeah,
I'm just kidding.
That also could work. That could also be a thing.
But yeah, no. Listen. Yeah, a late round flyer on Baker Mayfield. Why the hell not? The talent there. I mean, hopefully Stefanski is going to be able to work with him. Hopefully the offensive line gets him, a little bit more confident, so he doesn't have to rush to throw the football to the wrong team more often than not. So everything is there. Same thing with Drew Lock. Everything is there. It's in place. Now they got to go out and do it.
They just got to make it happen. So we'll see.